3, 2, 1. Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for our third Nautical Nights speaker night of 2021. I hope everyone is doing well, and for those of you in Kingston, welcome to post-lockdown for the interim period. As some of you know, my name is Michelle Clarbut. I'm with the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston, and normally this is a series that we normally offer in person, and of course with COVID we've switched to virtual, so we're very grateful that you were able to join us this evening. The Nautical Night Speaker Series is an event that the Marine Museum has been doing for the last couple of years now in partnership with the Kingston Yacht Club, where we would normally be hosting this series. And the mission of the Marine Museum is very much to connect you, the public, with the maritime heritage of Kingston and the Great Lakes. And so part of fulfilling that function is being able to offer this speaker series where we cover a number of different topics, from local history to sailing, exploration, both local and nationally. A couple of housekeeping features to start. For those of you who are using the YouTube chat function, I invite you to share where you're joining us from this evening. And throughout the presentation, you're able to submit your questions, and we'll make sure we keep track of them so we can ask Jim those questions at the end of the presentation. You're also welcome to send your questions to our Marine Museum email address, marmuse@marmuseum.ca. That will be provided in the YouTube chat for you. If you're not able to use the YouTube chat, I invite you to send your emails that way. They will be monitored, and I'll try to make sure I don't miss any by the end of the presentation. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker for the evening. Jim McRae has been on and around Lakers all his life, beginning as a young boy when he first started visiting the ships during winter layup in the hometown of Montreal. Over the years, he had part-time jobs aboard ship during college and has featured the Great Lakes Seaway industry in much of his work over the last 2 decades. He's probably shared stories with more sailors than anyone else in Canada, beginning with his dad. And I'm sure, like many of you, I'm also very much looking forward to listening to some of the stories that he has prepared for us today. For those of you who aren't aware, this topic of today's presentation is available as an online book on seawayqueens.com, and that link will be provided in the YouTube chat as well. And I'm sure Jim and his colleague will be able to touch upon the information pertaining to the online book and during the presentation, and remind you again at the end where to find that information. Everyone, please join me in welcoming Jim virtually, and I'll pass the screen over to Jim. Thank you.
Michelle, Michelle, thank you for the kind introduction and the warm welcome. It's a pleasure to be here tonight, and to start, I'd like to congratulate you and Doug for putting on and continuing the speaker series. It's a great event, and it keeps people in contact, in touch, and it's especially necessary these days. Thank you also to you guys are being hosted by the Yacht Club as you reinvent yourself for the next generation, and also I'd like to congratulate Chris West for his vision for the museum going forward. It'll benefit all of Canada, all of Canadians. So thanks for having us and listening to our story about our stories and our Great Lakes stories about the vessels that we love. And so we created this book, and it's called Seaway Queens. We like the title a lot. We created it because we look back on an era when these ships, they were purpose-built, for our waterway, North America's waterway, Canada and US. So we couldn't think of a better representation of these vessels and their beauty than to call them queens, and have a bit of fun with that title. And coincidentally, one of the vessels we feature in the book is actually called the Seaway Queen, and a longtime family friend. He was more like an uncle to us, and our family. He was a wheelsman on the Seaway Queen way back in the day, and he would tell me about this vessel. And then my wife surprised me, and she's been supportive of the book. She surprised me with this photo that she found through networking on the internet, and a photographer who took this photo supplied it to us for the book. So it continues with what our goal was for the book, was to celebrate the ships to make it a community event. In my case, to make it a family event. And Salma's case, and Salma's joining me on the call tonight, is she's a designer. So when she looks at things like this, ships, she sees the beauty of the form. So the book itself, actually, the word celebrates probably overused these days, but it kind of works in this case. It celebrates the form of the vessels and the actual beauty of them. Again, they're purpose built, for the lakes. They're long and narrow. You don't typically see this on ocean ships or ships of other areas, but they're meant to maximize cargo lift in the channels of the North American waterway, especially the Seaway. So they're long and narrow, and they have fine lines. And they have beautiful lines. And we looked at that and said, wow, it's too good of a story not to tell. So even the idea that they're built forward and aft, as people who follow Lakers know this, there's a forward house and an after house. These classic vessels also had a society on board where if you lived forward, you were part of the navigation crew. If you lived aft, you were part of the engineering crew. And there's only one crew on a ship, and they all get along, of course, to make the ship run smoothly. But there are distinct differences between people who live forward and work forward and people who lived aft and work aft. And those people also follow different career paths as well. So all of these things come together, and it makes for a great and magical story. So we put this book together with those quick thoughts in mind, and then we dug down a bit deeper and tried to tell the deeper story of shipping way back to the Phoenicians. You gotta love the Phoenicians. Every time you mention shipping, you have to give them their due, right up until modern era. And in the modern era, what we're now seeing on the lakes is a progression of technology and sophistication and different forms of the ships. So the ships are changing in form, but that's okay. That's what life does. But in our case, we wanted to take a snapshot of time, like a freeze frame of time, and go back to an era where the ships were beautiful and what's the word? I guess emotional too, because they had a certain voice of an era. They were elegant, they were beautiful, they were streamlined. In fact, one of our featured vessels in the book is based on Art Deco streamlined design, and it's a famous vessel, and I think the most beautiful one ever created on the lakes, and the Ryerson, the Edward Ryerson. And if you ask anyone, including strangers who don't know much about shipping, they're going to quote the Ryerson. And see that poster behind me? We created this poster as a companion piece for the project. So we based that poster on our inspiration for Art Deco streamlined design. And I'll get into that poster a bit more later, later on. But the idea of that is, again, capturing the form, capturing the beauty and form and time of shipping on the lake. So that's the quick overview. It's all based on emotion and nostalgia, perhaps, but art and design more importantly. And then we mix some storytelling. And the storytelling is my take on the story of Lakers from when I was younger until now. And it's run through my family and my experience as a person. So any stories that we want to put in the book, we put in the book, So we don't sort of hesitate if something is a bit too fun or a bit too playful in language or in scope. Instead, we actually see that as a reason why to put it in the book. So there's tons of books and beautiful books that are done on the lakes and Lakers, and over this shoulder, you'll see a small library of them, and they're great. And they tell about trade and technology and ship construction and trade, products being moved here, there, and everywhere. Perfect. Our book doesn't do that. Our book more or less gets into the playfulness of the industry and the characters involved, including the sailors. Don't forget the sailors, and they've been participating too, by sharing their own stories for the book as well. So that's a super quick overview. I could get into a bit more detail as we go, but if you have a question, Michelle, ask me one now, or I keep going. So up to you. Yeah. So the idea is we broke the book down into 10 chapters. It's just an easy number. And we decided that we would do it just before the pandemic hit. So actually we thought about it long before the pandemic, but when we decided to do the book, it was just before the pandemic hit. And we said, oh, well, now what do we do? So instead of struggling to go through our regular channels of producing a book, as we normally do, because we produce books, including visiting with people and visiting museums and going through archives and taking our own photographs or doing our own video, we had to do it all remotely, you know, and including engaging with our printer and so on. So we had to do it all remotely. So then we decided, oh, geez, what are we going to do about that? So we went digital. We decided to do a digital book, and we looked at ways of getting the story out anyway, even during the pandemic, and using some of the functionality of modern technology to sort of tell that story, right? So our book is not just digital, it's interactive. It features audio, video, motion design, and various nuts and bolts things too. Like if we give a footnote, for example, we'll highlight the footnote by having an icon that would pop up and allow you to navigate the pages by pressing on the footnotes or pressing on the different different tools and buttons that you have to explain what you're looking at as you're reading. So it's like flipping to the back of the book, or typically to the back of the book, but instead it's always in front of you. So your controls are at your fingertips, just like a computer would allow you to do. And it allows you to do things too, like spool through photos active on the page, as you see. We have audio. That's my take on what I'm telling you now, but as I voiced it and recorded it, Salma put it in our design. Salma's our designer, and she put it in the design with audio. So now you could click on and have the audio come up as you're looking at that page. And then the rest of it is, anyone who's used a computer will know how to do this. So the rest of it is all computer functions, right? But the marriage of the two between the text and the functionality is what we're trying to achieve in this version of the book, the digital book. That said, I know a lot of people who like print. They don't necessarily like print on a computer screen. So they'll say, oh, I like to read something. So we appreciate that, but we can't do it right now. So we created this book instead. Therefore, the storytelling is actually quite condensed. So each chapter is only about 3,000 words. If and when we go to a print version, we'll blow out some of those stories and tell a deeper story in some cases. So the read is fairly brief. The visuals are fairly strong, and the interactivity is kind of magical. All three together would make sense for this book. If we go to the print, though, we need to show a book print and layout that is equal to the task of showing the beauty of the vessel. So if you look at this book digitally, some of the photos are nice and beautiful and wonderful, and the videos too, right? But when you see this book in landscape form, like in a coffee table type form, we want to accentuate the beauty of the photograph. So we'll take advantage of the print page, right? Which we can't necessarily do at 100% for the digital version of the book. So that's some of the nuts and bolts. You have a question, Michelle? Go ahead.
Yeah. No, sorry, just a technical thing. I don't know if it's your microphone banging on your lapel, but it's every once in a while it kind of just comes and it takes away from the audio.
I'm doing that for dramatic effect. I apologize. But so the 10 chapters are playfully, and we'll go through them quickly. And then Salma, at one point, will interject with her take on the design. But from the storytelling standpoint, we have our intro by me, and then we have a foreword by this wonderful person out of America, Joseph Fisher, longtime naval architect, pretty famous on the lakes. He's been building ships longer than I've been alive, and he's quite a gentleman and a true keeper of the knowledge as far as lakes vessels go. Mr. Fisher actually has his initials on the bow of the Ryerson, on the drawings of the Ryerson's bow when she was built. And he'll claim that it was nothing, he was just helping out. And I don't believe it, because he's a really, really, really insightful and smart person. And his initials are on the bow drawing. So the most famous ship in all the Great Lakes, he wrote the foreword to our book. And if you look at, this is a technical drawing from Mr. Fisher that he sent to us. And way down at the right, there's a little area on the legend side where you could actually sign off on something, and his initials are there. So proof is in the pudding. Mr. Fisher's initials should be JPF. JPF right at the bottom down there. Yeah. So anyway, so he's been there from the get-go when it comes to lakers design for the traditional Seaway size vessels, and especially on the Ryerson, which is an iconic vessel on the lakes. So we're super happy and proud to have Mr. Fisher involved with us, and he's A delight. So we went and we talked about the start of the book by going way back to Archimedes and how do ships float? Everyone always asked that question, and I didn't know the answer actually. So I asked my daughter. So Salma could pull up a small interactive in chapter 1 where she shows us through my daughter's. She's an engineer, and she shows us cute little drawing on how ships float. And if you click on it, it comes forward, and if you click back, it goes back again. So that's just one example of interactivity, and it's playful. I mean, are most people going to buy the book to realize how a ship floats? Probably not, but we like it. And then we tell the story about how Archimedes actually took his knowledge and actually built the most glorious ship in the world at the time. He gave it away to the Egyptians, I believe. And then going forward, we tell the quick history of seafaring and marine, because you could get bogged down with fascinating stuff. There's so much stuff out there to include in the book. We don't have space, and people do it better than we do as far as the rich history of marine goes. So we just wanted to quickly navigate to North America as fast as we could. So we tell the quick history of shipping, and we tell why ships were built, and then we tell why ships were built for the lakes and how they're built for the lakes, and then the form that they took, within our book. So we went through some of those chapters fairly quickly, telling about the history. We talked about Art Deco in the design and the concept. We talked about the house divided on the vessels, like you live forward, you live aft. That's another chapter. We talk about the 730 size for the vessels. 730 is the maximum Seaway tolerance for length. It long was, on the Seaway. Now it's 740. So that's a chapter unto itself. Why are they 730? We talk about the art of shipping. Well, this is fun. We talked about how the beauty of shipping is exhibited through the artwork of shipping. And so we looked at some of the most famous pieces of maritime art ever done. And then we looked at some of the artists who are involved here in North America and in Canada. And so we feature some of our favorites, like Captain Bud Robinson, long time with Canada Steamship Lines. He was an artist who sailed on board as a captain, and he was a captain who sailed on board as an artist. He'd actually do art while sailing, and he comes from a long history of people in Canada, families in Canada who have a long history with Great Lakes shipping. And most of his family, to some degree, are artists as well in different forms. His brother, he built ship models. And we wanted to feature, I think it's Bill Robinson is his name. And during COVID, we couldn't break away and get over to his atelier to see his models, but we want to on the printed book as we get to that, So even in that case, the people who actually participated in shipping actually participated in that chapter through their expression of art and shipping. So that was super fun. Our last chapter, until we do a chapter per month that we release. And so our last chapter released was freshwater sailor stories. So these are stories that I've collected that are mainly true, and we talk about the color, the fascination, just the sort of hardworking and dedication of these crews who actually deliver cargoes while you're sleeping and do it tirelessly throughout the year. And so we tell stories of this nature through my observation of the sailors who did it, and they shared their lore as part of their, but they don't brag, they're kind of real conservative in nature. And if you don't ask them, they won't tell you. And when they tell you, they don't tell you it's not like they're not bombastic. So you have to sort of dig a bit and get into their mindset and tell their story from a perspective that makes them comfortable, if that makes sense. So that chapter tells sailor stories, and again, they're fun, but not one of them will take credit for the work they do, which is really curious and probably admirable too. Like they're really, really nice people. Anyway, so these stories in this chapter talk about perspective of sailing on the vessels, sailing on the lakes, and doing the trades that they do. This particular ship, as you're seeing, the McGiffin, one of my favorite people ever, the Captain Lars Bowman. He's super, super talented and nice and conservative and quiet, and he's quite a gentleman. He's a poster person for a gentleman sailor. Anyway, he became the Commodore of the Canada Steamship Lines fleet, over the years. And that vessel that you're looking at, in one season, I think they did about 140 separate trips supplying steam coal for power generation in Ontario. So they would carry coal out of Appalachian coal out of Ohio, bring it across the lake and keep the lights on in Ontario. 140 trips. Just think of that for a second. Every half day, they were either loading or unloading or transiting the lake nonstop. And they did 4 million tons in a year. It's phenomenal. And that ship kept running and kept going. And I don't remember any real negative stories about the vessel. And she just performed like a trooper. And no one ever bragged about it. They just did their job, you know. So that's the essence of what we try to achieve in the storytelling, is like celebrate it without over celebrating it, you know. And the guys make the story, actually. The crew makes the story, and that was quite a joyful. I took a trip, you know, on the vessel, and I did a photo essay with them, and they were quite gentle with me, actually, because it's a hard trade, you know. So anyway, so we're up to that chapter now, and that's just released. The next chapter, it's almost like a demarcation point for us on the book. The next chapter will get into technology, like self-unloading, which is a North American creation and export. And then we'll get into more advanced technology on the vessels, because now, as we go forward, as like anything else, is becoming more automated and using fancy things like sensors and remote, remote control is an easy word to use, but they're using some sort of remote control technology on some vessels that are being introduced in North American waters now on the lakes. And the unloading equipment is getting more and more sophisticated as well. So there'll be plenty to talk about in the forward-looking chapters on automation technology and all the really clever stuff that's coming on stream as well, you know. So that's a quick overview of the chapter. So as we release them month on month, we tend to send out a blast, like an email blast or something, and letting people know that the chapters are available, and they could download the chapters one at a time. They don't have to take the whole book. They could take one chapter and then none of the others if they like. So there's no obligation to take the whole book if you're interested in the subject matter. You could go at your own pace, as it were. We want people to take it all, but you know, depends on how they feel, yeah, and if they like the subject matter. So we're cool with that, you know. So if you have any questions, go ahead. But if not, I have a few more points to raise about the project. Michelle.
Yes, we did have a question come in. The question was, what is the typical service life of one of these ships?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's like all great questions, there's no easy answer. Lakers could last a lifetime, and often they do, and more than that. On the American side, they typically last longer. They could go 4, 5, 6 decades because they typically trade in freshwater on the Great Lakes. And freshwater is a lot kinder to steel than saltwater is. The Canadian side doesn't have the luxury of only trading in freshwater. In fact, they need to trade in saltwater, kind of where Quebec City starts, or where the river at Quebec City starts. So when they start trading on the saltwater trades, it's a brutal. It could be brutal on the steel, so it could degrade the steel faster. So Canadian ships, though, having said that, Canadian ships could still serve 30, 35 years, and that sort of thing. So take a ratio, but don't quote me on it. Take a ratio of Americans, Great Lakes vessels could probably do twice the service duty as Canadian ones, but the Canadian ones, that said, could still do a long-term, have a long life compared to saltwater ships, which in fact might even be half of what I just said about the Canadian ones. So the saltwater ship might, if you see a saltwater ship 12 or 14, 15 years old, well, that's an old ship. On the Great Lakes, you're kind of saying, well, she's just catching her stride, you know, sort of thing. But that's a very good question. Yeah.
One question I had a bit more to do with kind of the evolution of the design, because you talk a lot about the design. I wonder if you had kind of some examples perhaps to show whether it's from one of the chapters or.
Well, if I could ask Salma to bring up some of the smaller vessels, Salma will know this from the canalers that we featured in the book, Salma, like whether photos or technical drawings, and then we could talk. Then we could show some of the bigger vessels. So the technical drawings and the photos, you may not appreciate them just in static like this, but they're smaller. So over time, those smaller vessels would get bigger and bigger as the Seaway size would allow. So prior to the building of the Seaway, it was very common to see ships on our trade. I say our, I mean North American, and especially at the Montreal area or Quebec City corridor down to Toronto. They see these ones here. See, these are smaller ones. These are like canalers, right? So they would need to fit in the Lachine Canal, which is 150 meters that way from my office. So the historic Lachine Canal is just across the street. Come one day, I'll show you. And so they would need to fit the small confines of that space, right? So they were sort of tiny. I think they might have been friends on this call are going to criticize me after, but they might be about 45 feet wide and about 300 feet long. That's, or 60 feet wide, perhaps as much as that. But they needed to fit through that canal. As the Seaway got built, the vessels became double in size. So the Seaway vessels would go 75 feet wide and 730 feet long because the locks were that big and the channels were that deep as compared to the smaller historic canals like the Lachine or the Soulange Canal, you know. But so if that answers the question, consider that the ships got bigger when the hourglass got bigger, you know, because if we saw this now, this would be almost just before the Seaway came open. So this would be the Lemoyne. So she would almost be Seaway Max. This version of the Lemoyne, there was another one, but this was almost Seaway Max, but she was less than 700, I believe, this one. But she was about 65 or 70 feet wide. So now we're seeing it get bigger, right? But if you saw the McGiffin that I bragged about carrying all that cargo out of Ohio, she would have been Seaway Max, or the maximum Seaway size at the time, 730 by 75. So that would have been that size. Now, those, on the Canadian side, those vessels, like that's the McGiffin. So she's 75 wide, 730 long. But now those vessels are allowed to be 740 feet long and 78 feet wide. And people are going to say, yeah, 10 feet, 3 feet, what's the difference? Cubic. Anyone who works on the lakes will say cubic lift. If you can lift more cargo, you make more money. Every foot counts. So that's why they're bigger. Another good question, though. Yeah. So stop me anytime with questions, but otherwise I could raise.
Sure.
Yeah.
We had a couple more come in. I'll ask her. Had to do with where the ships were made then and now. I mean, I know there was a number of shipyards around the Great Lakes. Yeah. Perhaps you could expand a bit more of how maybe they're coming back. Yeah,
the shipyards around the lakes. Some of the bigger ones have never left. Some of the smaller ones, they have been retired. But the bigger ones, like at Port Weller is working around the clock right now, servicing I think 3 ships for winter repair work. So Port Weller under Heddle Marine is doing very well, and you know, it's very vibrant for a lakes yard, and I believe they're also bidding on government contracts for various whether Navy or Coast Guard jobs. I believe that to be true. Here in Quebec, down at Quebec City, famous yard is still putting out ships, still building sophisticated vessels, and also pioneering or wanting to pioneer the next generation of Coast Guard vessels, you know, so they're very vibrant. On the West Coast, now this is not lakes anymore, but on the West Coast, there's a very vibrant, through C-SPAN, and there's a very vibrant shipbuilding community on the West Coast. To that point, the last ships to be built, oh, it's a good question though, but the last ship to be modified or built in Canada at Port Weller would have been a conversion project under Canada Steamship Lines. Again, I'm going from memory, but they would have converted an existing lakes vessel to make it larger. So they read the book, in the future chapter, you'll see. But they took the existing power plant on the vessels and they married them to a brand new forward section. So that was pretty sophisticated and smart because they were able to rejuvenate the fleet by making it bigger and more efficient. So that was like a building project, but it wasn't a complete new build. So now the vessels are typically, not always, but typically built overseas and brought into Canadian water. So most recently we saw fleet renewal occurring out of China for some companies, out of Croatia for some companies. And I think that's about it. for supply of vessels to Canada. On the American side, though, everyone's celebrating the brand new naming, keel laying of the Mark E. Barker, I believe it's called. I have a note about that. The proper spelling is the Mark E. Barker, being built. She'll be the first lakes vessel built in decades on the lakeside, and she's going to be a forward end self-unloader and quite sophisticated. So the Great Lakes community is quite excited about that, on the American side, because that's like that's like a big event, So fully American built, fully American crewed, and flagged U.S. self-unloader coming in 2022. So I have a friend.
Very exciting news.
I have a friend on the call, and my good buddy Tom Berder tells me that a canaler would have been 259 by 44 by 14 deep. So there you go. That's a good supportive community I have there. So good question.
Oh, that's wonderful. No, it's very exciting to hear that obviously the shipbuilding coming back into the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Big and small. There's a small company in Kingston that's doing some contract work. And of course, Kingston Shipyards has a history where the Kingston, our historic site, the Marine Museum of the Great Lakes Historic Site, which is the Kingston Dry Dock and Engine Room, it was, of course, the location of Kingston Shipbuilding, and did have contracts with CSL and building ships, repairing them. So there's another place in the Great Lakes.
No, absolutely. Well, absolutely. I could segue if you like. Other friends who are always supportive of my work, and actually that when I say supportive, I really mean they're patient with me. So my good buddies Kevin and Ray Johnston, their family goes back to Kingston, and their dad Bill, he's famously known as Bill Johnston, William Johnston, and he was an engineer and architect, and I think he cut his teeth at Kingston, at the yard. So again, Kevin will correct me probably in an email in 12 seconds, but I think his dad and Ray could carry on with that story too. His dad was a pioneer, and he was also a pioneer on the self-unloading side too. So as well as building the ships that actually, the form that floated, he actually designed the technology and what is famously referred to as the sea loop, or the self-unloading system. It looks like a sea, would lift cargo from the cargo hold up, fight gravity, and dump it onto the dock. So he was a pioneer on that side too. The Johnsons are one family, Canadian family on the lakes, who have had just a long history, including through generations. But in the book, I relied on my buddy Tom. His dad was worked at the shipyard. There was a shipyard over here on the Lachine Canal back in the day. And also I've been working with Bud Robinson. That's another family that goes back generations on the lakes, and the Pike family, going back years and years. And so I feel the stories are best told through these families, because they stuck with it, and they've carried that heritage and tradition throughout, on the lake. So when you talk about ships, that's one thing, but there are people behind it too, and a lot of these families have invested a lot of their adult working years and their ingenuity into the industry, and including on the American side. I'm speaking from the Canadian perspective, but my good friend Roger from Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan. Hey, Roger. So he's on the call tonight, and he's the keeper of the flame on the American side, and he could tell you much more about the industry, especially on the American side, than I could ever dream of. And he publishes a book every year. It's called Know Your Ships, and it's sort of like the Bible for ship watchers. So those people who run out to spot ships floating by, they probably have Roger's book in their pocket. And he's also developed an online community, and Know Your Ships community on Facebook. They allowed me in, and the other thing was, Roger's been helping us by promoting our poster and our book amongst his community. So he's been very helpful. So that's like another community aspect. So it's family and friends of Jim and Salma and Griffintown Media. So that's really important for our project.
Oh, that's great. We've had several other questions come in. So if I'm okay to continue with the questions, and you can jump back in afterwards.
If I can't answer any, I'll put a call out on my email.
There we go. That's so awesome now then. Perfect.
Yeah.
So one we had come in had to do with a bit I guess, expanding a bit more on terms of the cargo specific boats and flexibility. So grain one way and coal the other.
Yeah, that's a great question. So traditionally, Canada, I think the British called us the lands of timber, or the lands of shipmasts back in the day, because we were famous for raw materials to help them build their fleet, the English fleet. Canada is still a raw material type of place when it comes to export shipping, but also shipping interprovincially or between two countries, US, Canada. But the person asking the question is really onto something, because traditionally the industry was built whereby you would take grain out of the lakehead, they call it, out of Thunder Bay, or places in Minnesota or Wisconsin, for example, but especially on the Canadian side, you take it out of Thunder Bay, you bring it all the way across the lakes, all the way down to Market, right? And Market could have been Montreal or Toronto or other places. Hamilton now is very popular for grain. And then we would consume it, bread on your table, or we would send it to North Africa and Italy, where they would make couscous or pasta. So the grain coming out of the lakehead was important for that one way coming down. The ships would then unload the grain. They would go up to the North Shore of Quebec and they would load iron ore. And then the iron ore would be brought down from northern Quebec to places like Detroit, where they made cars, or Hamilton, where they made all sorts of steels for your kitchen appliances. Probably people's toasters were actually originating in the ground up in northern Quebec. So you would have that two-way trade, and it was so essential because shipping's all about making the best use of cargo capacity and lift with the minimum amount of fuel burn and manual labor, of course, too. But so if you could maximize your trips by minimizing your run, that's the magic of that trade. So they always would load one way and then load the other way. And I was told, and I think it might have been either Ray or my friend Tom, who said, never should two company ships meet empty. They should never meet. That ships don't pass each other when they meet, right? So one ship should never be empty if it's from the same company. One ship should always be full going in one direction, and the other could be empty, but it should never also be empty. So that's a little insight there. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. So it's more so ships meeting in the night.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, because they don't pass. Because passing would be like going around and going by a ship. When ships, they meet. It's kind of romantic, actually. So,
yeah. Quite nice. Yeah. All right, a couple more. Roll it in here. Let's go here. I'm going to hold that one just in case you come to it. There's a comment about one of the more unusual ship designs was the whaleback.
Yeah,
the design came and went, and then it eventually disappeared. Was there a fundamental design limitation that led to this? That's a very good question, and I don't know the full answer. I was fascinated to a point of the whaleback and how to work it into the book, but it's almost a book by itself. So I didn't get into the whaleback as much. I don't know the reason why they weren't perceived as being as efficient or economical as other ships were. But for those who don't know, and you could Google it, it looks like a whale. So it almost is perceived as I almost picture it like as a submarine when it floats on top of the water as opposed to underneath. It looks like it looks like a whale would look in the water at repose, So that's how the ship looked. Why it wasn't as efficient, I could only guess that it didn't allow for quicker and efficient loading and unloading. By the way, that's a huge thing on the lakes because we're dealing in volume. And if you could maximize, again, by minimizing your time spent at the dock, whether loading or unloading, you kind of need lots of cargo holds with big spaces. And I don't know if the whaleback allowed that. That's just an observation by looking at the form of the vessel. I don't know the proper answer, but I can look for it. And if the person with the question wants to send it to me, I'll see if I could do some more research, and share it, All right. One more question, and we'll continue. I'll let you continue.
Yeah.
There's one of the photos. I think it's the Giffen. Apologies if I got the name of the ship wrong already. There's a comment about noticing the self-loading ship you showed earlier was only has superstructure at the stern. I'm wondering, any idea why that was? Yeah,
that's a great question, actually, because it's a self-unloading ship. So back in the day when you saw the quicker view of the ships where they had a forward house and an after house, that was because they wanted to keep the accommodations separate, and the forward accommodations and navigation bridge was almost there to provide better vantage, when you're sailing, because I think my good friend Joseph Fisher would tell me that sailors would sometimes literally roll down the window and listen for fog horns, because that you're right at the forward end of the ship, and that aided you in your navigation, right? But with technology, navigation aids came on stream, and you allowed for things to be moved back aft, like you see in this photo. So when you look back at the photo, everything is centralized back aft. So that allowed you to centralize your accommodations, probably your electricity, your plumbing, your technology, and at the same time, never diminishing your navigation capacity, because now you had radar, now you have what they call ECDIS, electronic charts, and all these different things that eventually would come. But this would allow the ship to be more efficient, all from one central space back aft, while still allowing you to maximize the load of the vessel. Because if you look at this vessel, you're probably going to guess, and you wouldn't be wrong, it looks to be about 70% built for carrying cargo. So everything's moved to one space back aft, and you can maximize your area for loading the vessel. Now, that was true too of the other vessels where it was forward and aft, because the deck was largely wide open. So you could actually load and unload fairly quickly and still carry a lot of stuff. But this will allow you to carry much more. So as an idea, just think of it this way. This vessel might carry 30,000 tons of looks like she's carrying coal, 30,000 tons of coal. Another vessel where it's forward and aft, she might only carry 26,000 tons. So already you're carrying much more cargo, by centralizing things back aft, and her dimensions were a bit bigger at the same time.
So there's a number of other questions, but I'm going to let you continue for a little bit, because I think you might either cover them or they're great wrapping up questions. So I'm going to hold on them.
Yeah, sure. And by the way, so you know what I'll do though? I'll let Salma jump in just to talk a bit about the design. Then I'll brag up our poster, and maybe then I'll put the pressure on you, Michelle. So anyone who asked, let's say 2 questions that you can pick from a hat, we'll send a free poster to whoever you pick from a hat. Okay, so is that good? So maybe Salma could talk just a little bit about the inspiration on the design side, and then we'll continue.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so in terms of design, obviously, the inspiration comes from the subject matter. So looking through the photos really was inspired, but there were 2 that really inspired me, or that stood out. And the first one was this picture of the stern of a ship, and then a worker. Just the dynamics and the contrast between the 2, and even the curvedness of the ship, is just something intriguing about it. So that was one that really inspired me. And the other one that actually set the tone for the design of the book was the Sykes photo. Let me just get to it. This one. I mean, it's such a beautiful shot. I mean, it just speaks for itself, right? It's just a beautiful, beautiful shot. And it also screams the Art Deco era and the streamlined era. So this is what set it off for me in terms of design and choosing the colors, the layout. So I'll run a little audio that explains a bit the design and also the look and feel. So just gonna attach it here. And by the way, you can find the full version in the book, chapter 2. So here you go.
The ships are beautiful, inspired me to create a look and feel that matched their elegance. It was important for me that the look and feel of everything associated with the book reflected the physical form of the classic Laker, but also the era they represented. Their look borrowed from Art Deco, but also an offshoot of the movement called Streamline Modern that became popular in industrial design and architecture. This influenced everything from my choice of the title and book font, the treatment of the cover, and the overall presentation of the content in the chapters. For example, the bold presentation of text, beginning with the drop cap to start each chapter, and the paragraphs closely stacked one on the next, is itself an Art Deco style page layout.
So there you go, just a little sample, but you can find the full version in the book, chapter 2. That's it for me.
Sorry, Salma, could you also
Yeah.
maybe just to connect with the poster and show how the Normandy poster actually helped us create the Ryerson poster?
Yeah, I'll put it up. 1 sec. So here it is. Just gonna make it bigger. I'll show the poster. Whoops. Oh, it's right here. So the Normandy poster was what inspired. First, when we saw the picture or just the poster itself, we were really inspired by it. It's such a beautiful poster, and it's well known around the world, right? So then, based on that, we decided, we're like, hey, why not? Let's just give it a shot and make a poster of the Ryerson. So based on that, I looked for photos that had a front view of the ship itself, and then found this photo, which was perfect. And then based on that, just created the shapes, just the basic shapes. And from there, just added on to the layers, and then ended up with this beautiful poster of the Ryerson. We also had a little bit of help with from Roger because of the windows. We wanted to simplify them, but he was like, no, that's not what it's supposed to look like. So then we made them more realistic, as I would say.
Nice. And the idea of the poster, and everyone who's listening, it's been a pretty good project. We've sent posters all over the world for people who are big fans of the Lakes community. And you never know, right? You start creating work, and then people also have this passion, and then you connect with them, and well, that's your community. And the Lakes community actually spans the world, which who knew? It does. So it's kind of a fun project, you know. Thank you, Salma.
You're welcome.
I have an answer, Michelle, from Tom, my buddy Tom. Whalebacks were also known as pig boats. And in fact, stability was an issue. Small hatch sizes were an issue as well. They were limited as well as not economical. So I think that answers a bit about that whaleback question.
That's great. You have them right on hand.
Yeah. I have a supportive community. The other thing I wanted to point out, and this is a bit of a, if you don't mind, and then we could wrap, you know, it's not a big deal. But by working with Kingston and the museum, why I'm going to say the following is because I believe it. It's super important that people support museums like Kingston Marine Museum because of my project. We couldn't do the project without you guys, and we've had this sort of very mutually beneficial relationship over the years, where at times I've worked for clients who helped the museum, and other times I work for clients who've benefited from the museum's work. And my good friend Kevin, one of the projects we started on way back when included the Canada Steamship Line's website. That was his baby, and he worked with Maurice Smith at the museum. So this goes back to the first websites of CSL. And Kevin had me then work on other projects, as did Ray. And I sent a small thank you, a little cactus to Kevin for helping my business. And he sent me a photo the other day. The cactus is much bigger, so I think that's a good omen for our mutual relationship. So, but the museums like in America, where Roger, if anyone wants to know Roger, he's a great person. He could tell you on the American side, the community is huge and supportive of the lakes industry, and their museums are vibrant, and their community aspect is great. And Roger's website, I think, Facebook site pulls in like 22,000 members or something like that, you know, so they're very much on it. And I know Canadians want to be too. They want to be on it, right? But in order to do that, the museum has to exist. So support Kingston. That's what I have to say about that. And one other thing, and it's personal to me, was in all the photos that you guys had stored, and including thousands that I sent to you and we shared over the years, Salma was putting together to the chapter one time, in one of the chapters, and she said, "Hey Jim, why don't I show a photo of these guys, these workers who are having a coffee break on the ship?" And I don't know if Salma could pull it up just now, but I said, "Well, show me." And I said, "Geez, I've seen hundreds and thousands of photos of men having coffee breaks on ships. I've never seen this photo of my father, my brother, and my cousin working on a lake or during winter layup in Montreal. I've never seen that photo until I found it at the Kingston Museum. So just like I bragged earlier about my wife helping me on the book and my daughter on the how vessels float, and my younger daughter on correcting my grammar because she's very good at that. Could you imagine? Like I found this photo in your archives. I've never seen it before, and that's my family. So it's a nice magical experience when you see something like that. You know? And they're all. Yeah, and I knew it was them immediately because they're all tea drinkers, you know. They weren't drinking I say coffee break, but they loved drinking their tea, you know, so they include me into that.
That's absolutely wonderful that we had this photos hidden away in our collection and you were able to find it.
Yeah.
That's a wonderful story to tell.
Yeah.
And I confess I haven't come across it yet, so I'll be going to look for it again. Actually, there's a comment that came in, and actually it's quite interesting because we have an intern this term working on a project to capture this, to research the story of CSL, Canada Steamship Lines, and to be able to create an online exhibit for our website. And so we've been going through a lot of our archive digitized photos, and one of which is the exact image that Selma shared just a few minutes ago of the man next to the ship and the propeller.
Yeah.
And it was a comment asking about, is that pic from the Titanic? Now, of course, I immediately recognize it. I know it's not the Titanic, but I can't recall where I saw the image to be able to go and look it up immediately. I'm not sure if you have the name of the vessel to hand.
From memory, I believe it's the T.R. McLagan. Salma, chime in if I'm wrong, but I think it's a T.R. McLagan.
I think it is. It's part of that collection. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's our call on that one, and she was a glorious vessel, the McLagan, and I believe she was named after a former president of Canada Steamship Lines. She was like the flagship back in the day. Well, I don't believe Seaway Max really in size, but certainly a forerunner to the trade. You know, and she was carried maximum loads at the time, you know, but a beautiful old steamship, you know, really spectacular. So yeah, those photos will take your breath away. And you know what? Black and white photos could be more emotional than color photos, you know, and that's an example because it tells a whole story, like just how casual the worker was with a sledgehammer waiting for, I guess, maybe the horn or whistle to sound and ready to knock the blocks away and have the vessel slip into the water. I mean, that's a beautiful image.
One thing I was trying to identify is if we knew the location from the photograph. I'm gonna have to go look for it and share it when I share the link to this presentation to everybody, because I said I came upon it just last week, I'm pretty sure. So it's quite coincidental that you've now shared it this evening and we've had it come up in conversation. So I'm going to be going to look for that one. If you can identify the location, it looks like there's a grain elevator in the background.
Yeah, I was always believing it was Collingwood because they built a lot of ships at Collingwood. But I think it's Midland, Ontario, I believe, because I was so convinced it was Collingwood, I didn't even question it until I looked at it and said, "Is it Collingwood?" And I think it's Midland. You know. So, anyways, I'm waiting for Tom's email.
Well, while we're waiting, we've had a number of other questions come in, so bear with me while I try to track back to the first one that I missed. So one question that came up was about booking a passage on a lake or from Montreal to Thunder Bay or vice versa.
Yeah, easier said than done. It used to be that, way back in the history of companies like Canada Steamship Lines, they had a passenger fleet, not as far as Thunder Bay, but they had a passengers fleet that was the Great White Fleet, I think they called it. That yes. Doesn't exist anymore. But you can't necessarily book a passage on a lakes vessel anymore. There's tons of reasons why. Security, safety, insurance, all these different things. So sometimes what the lakes companies will do is I've seen fundraising where you could actually bid on a trip. The winner would get a trip. And I think customers and suppliers and other people who would be part of the network of the business, sometimes they're offered trips on the vessels, but unfortunately you can't book on a working ship like this. It's too bad. I mean, I've done the trip many times, and people who don't do that trip, or people who do that trip, will always come away and say, "I had no idea how beautiful it is. Like the lakes are like, oceans and all this stuff. And then you actually sail by communities like Sault Ste. Marie, and you see Phil and Tony Esposito's house on the left side, and probably where Roger lives on the right side, on the American side. So you see all these different fun things. Passenger ships, though, they'll charge a pretty penny. Like when the pandemic lifts and passenger travel becomes a thing again on ships, you're going to see more and more cruising on the lakes because it's become quite popular, and it's not cheap actually. So it's you think it's in our backyard, therefore it's cheap to take a cruise on the Great Lakes. It's actually as comfortable and as bespoke as you would on a big ocean liner. So it's not a cheap trip, but if you have the opportunity, do it, because you won't forget it. So
no, I don't imagine. I'm sure it's quite the once in a lifetime trip to make. Quite the experience. You had a comment come in.
Tom Berdeur says the McLagan was built in 1954 at Midland, Ontario. So
there you go.
There you go.
Okay. Right. Okay. So questions here. We had one had to do reading into climate change and the effects. Of course, the reducing ice on the lakes and what that means for the seaway openings, etc.
We've seen recently where the Seaway will open longer when it's exceptionally mild, but they won't necessarily do it if it's mild. See, they typically close near about Christmas or cheat into New Year's on the Canadian side every year. I think on the American side it's a bit longer at Soo. Roger will tell me it's probably near about mid-January or something at the Soo. But if it's mild at Christmas and they've planned to close it on the 26th of December, like let's say we have a mild day or a mild week ahead, they're not going to say, oh, let's change our plans and keep her going. They don't do that because shipping is planned like all business. So you just can't extend it because it happens to be mild one week versus another week. But the patterns are suggesting, because of climate change, that one of the aspects that's sometimes mentioned is extending navigation season. And that could include the lakes and on the Seaway, where normally they have to close for about 2.5 months. So if they could win that time back, it's an advantage for business, for their own customers on a waterway, for sure. But, and I don't want to sound controversial tonight, but I don't know what that means about how we should feel about climate, because I wouldn't necessarily think that's a good thing, because I like winter, I like ice, I like snow, and I've come to accept that we need to accept seasons that are proper and true, and when we see them slipping away, it's telling us something. And I think weather and climate are changing because of our activity on the planet. Now, will that allow for shipping to occur longer on waterways like the Seaway or the Canadian Arctic? Sure, but there's a cost. There's a cost for that. Sorry for being preachy. So,
right. I imagine.
Well,
I was going to say.
No, go ahead. Yeah, no, please.
I was going to say, I imagine most of us are very familiar with the water, the lakes, and knowing what actually that means on a larger scale. When you know that the ice isn't free, the ice isn't covering the lakes, and water levels are rising, and there's a number of factors that go into affecting it. Right,
and later in the book, we're going to attempt to bring that almost as a closing chapter, because we're going to take out a crystal ball and say, okay, what is this going to look like? I mean, the industry, in the next 20 years. So that subject has to include climate and weather, just like it will include technology and trade patterns for sure. I'm not an expert. I'm just going to make some observations, but it has to include climate, but it has to include technology and climate and understanding of climate and all the things that we need to do to lessen the impact of our activities. And if we can't do that, unfortunately, it's like reacting to the consequences. So we'll have to figure that out as we go. Now, again, I won't be preachy. I'll just perhaps make a few suggestions that I've observed, and like you say, water levels, in some cases in late 90s, water was running so high that you could load a boat so deep, because the water was there. And then I remember maybe it was 2006 or 7 or so, water levels were low. You couldn't load the boat as deep. So we're always trying to find out that equilibrium, and it's tough. It's tough. But yeah, I think climate's going to be an issue going forward, for not just the Great Lakes, for everyone. So.
Right. Okay. Let me go back to find the last one here. So, and I think this is a question from perhaps a relative. Of all the stories you told and continue to tell through Seaway Queens,
Yes.
which do you think your dad would identify with or appreciate most, and why?
That's a good question. It'd be hard to tell because my dad was from that era, he didn't tell you what he thought or how he felt because, you weren't supposed to. And quite frankly, I admire that about him. But I guess the thing that he might appreciate most is like he was a lakes guy. He was born in Windsor, Ontario, and spent his career sailing the world. So he wasn't a lakes guy. He was born on the Detroit River, but as a young man, he'd be off in places like Korea and the Far East and Northern Europe and delivering the product for people around the world. So what he'd be most proud of is probably the appreciation of the sailor stories. He'd tell me all sorts of stories, and again, he'd tell me because I asked him. He wouldn't tell me because he wanted to talk like me. He would just tell me because it was proper to answer the question, but he never bragged about it. And I think if he was alive and read this book, he just might be proudest if he could read the stories and not read that they're embellished. Have fun with them, but again, sailors aren't. They're conservative people, and no, he was the most conservative person I probably knew, actually. So.
All right. Let's see here. We got that one. Was a comment very much liking the lake community spans the world quote. Was much appreciated by Maurice.
Maurice, yes.
The question of about the museum, I'll bring that up in a little bit. I'll wait with questions here. So there's a comment about asking if you could comment on naval activity, both shipbuilding and naval training on the Great Lakes. I'm not sure if you did cover any or touched upon any of that, or. It's really a hole in my knowledge. I'm not like a military guy. So, I have noticed at different times where I've been on vessels where people have come from a military background. A good friend of mine, John Pace, he was a captain at Canada Steamship Lines. I believe he had a naval background. And I recently met a fellow who was part of a naval squadron out of the Vancouver back in the day, and now he's like on the Seaway, and he's like helping direct the operations on the Seaway. So apart from naval vessels, I do know that you could transfer your naval knowledge if you're trained in a Navy or in the Coast Guard. You could transfer it to a commercial lakes trade. I wouldn't say seamlessly because there's a learning curve for everything, but your knowledge travels with you, as a sailor. So the different companies have benefited from naval expertise in their fleets, but I'm not a warships guy. So, but on the American side, I know like when it comes to investing in defense and so on, the shipyards are very healthy and they're very active in building vessels for not just for the lakes. The vessels could sail out of the lakes after being built and go on patrols around U.S. or especially coastal, but certainly on overseas missions too. So the U.S. side has a more vibrant shipbuilding community on the lakes than Canada does. But again, not an expert, so I apologize for that. No, it's quite all right. I definitely recommend Roger Litweiler, who was our speaker back in the autumn, has definitely done a lot of, as opening up to the audience member, he's definitely done a lot of naval history research on ships that were built in the Great Lakes, served in the wars, etc.
Yep.
Not just Second World War, but into the future as well, or recent past, I should say.
Right. Yeah.
So I would direct that audience member to take a look at some of the work that Roger's done in terms of the naval and the Great Lakes, and of course come back to the museum when we reopen.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, let's jump through here. When do you remember first becoming fascinated by ships?
About 6 years old, or 5 or something, I don't know, but about that time. And in the start of the book, I talk about how I think I was a young boy, and I forget already. I probably was about 8 or 9 or something like this, And my uncle, family friend, Jerry Sweeney. Hey, Kevin, you remember Jerry? So he would have us working down. My brothers, not me, I was too young, but my brothers would be working down on the docks during the winter, doing maintenance and so on the vessels. And my eldest brother, Bob, who I like to take shots at in the book, so he was a ship keeper on one of the vessels, and so every time I got the chance, I'd sneak down to the harbor and just explore the vessel. What's your cat's name?
It's Dawn. It's bringing good luck to the museum because black cats bring good luck on ships.
Yeah. But Dawn, yeah, Dawn. So yeah, so I'd go exploring around the vessels. I'd climb all over the place. I would climb up on the smokestack. I'd climb up on the forward mast. I'd go down in the cargo holds in the engine room, and I just thought every kid did that, or there was no reason why any kid should do that, right? Now I realize I was probably the biggest security risk in the company's history as an 8-year-old boy climbing to the top of a forward mast in the middle of a Montreal winter. It's not a good look, So, but I don't. That's a memory I'll always have, But also the freedom of doing it, because no one told you no. Back in the 70s, no one told you no. They just said, my brother and my father, they told me, hey, and I thought they were going to scream at me. And they said, don't fall. Here I am like 45 feet in the air, and they would say, don't fall. That was their sage wisdom,
Oh, that's wonderful. Okay, let's see here. There's renewed interest in shipping oil through the Seaway. Are these tankers double-hulled?
There is renewed interest. I think it's always been a conversation, and especially now that let's say the Keystone project's been put on hold with the new administration in America. That might even become a thing again, right? But I don't know to what degree that'll increase. We still do have pipelines bringing Western oil to the east. Pipelines are, by volume and through infrastructure, probably way more efficient than solitary vessels doing the same trade. Will it increase? Yes and no. I think the planet has reached peak oil, right? So in so much that Alberta has to get its oil out of a landlocked province into export, it'll be there to handle any excess volume. I think on the shipping side, will oil transport on the lakes increase going forward? I can't say, except for every day I read how every country's goal seems to be limiting oil or lessening oil. I mean, and so I don't know what the longer term future would be when it comes to shipping oil on the lakes. I just don't know how competitive it could be when it comes to doing otherwise with a pipeline, But there are tankers. There are tankers that ship oil, but not like you might imagine tankers coming out of Venezuela or the Middle East or something like this. I think you'll do see tankers, but you won't see fleets and fleets of tankers now. Could that change? I suppose, but I just wonder about peak oil and if we're at it and if we're going to decrease over time. Yeah. Sorry, Michelle.
Apologies, I forgot to turn my mic off on.
Yeah.
There's questions about the poster.
Yes.
So fabulous, loving the talk. We just, as Jim briefly mentioned, and I forgot to mention at the beginning, we will be taking the names down of everyone who's engaged in the presentation with questions to do a draw for 2 posters that Jim says he will give away. Yeah. We will coordinate that afterwards.
Yeah, they'll come in. We send them in tubes. We try to design a bottle so you get a ship in a bottle, but Salma balked at that because there's too much work. So we just put a sticker on it and we put the ships in the tube. So you get it in the mail.
Love that. Okay, let's see here. Make sure I'm not missing any last ones here. So if the individual perhaps doesn't win the draw, is there another way they can obtain the poster?
Well, yeah. The best way would be we have a website for our book, and the poster is also featured on the website. So it's seawayqueens.com. Salma, is that correct? seawayqueens.com. And
link is in the chat, and we'll make sure we put that in again for
yes,
everyone.
I'll put it up.
Yeah. And the poster typically ships, like if you order it tomorrow, it'll get there within 10 or 12 days or something, because we used to go with the postal, Canada Post or US Post, but sometimes, and especially at the Christmas rush, it was just too much. So we started putting them up by courier, and it probably gets to person's house within about anywhere from 5 to 7 days. Oh, here's our webpage here. So, yep, there it is. Yep. Yep, there. That's it. Yeah.
So while we're looking at while Selma's showing the website, I'll just remind everyone to send in any last questions that they have. I am checking email as well. Marmus, MARMUS at marmuseum.ca. And I'll just take another quick look through the chat here to make sure I haven't missed anyone. A lot of comments. It is the TR McLaughlin that was in that photograph.
Oh, good. Yeah.
In Midland, that was built in Midland.
Yeah.
There we go. This is actually a question that I've had in the last week. Has a little bit to do with the sea shanties and wondering any lake shanties that you might have come across in your travels or in the stories.
Yeah.
Any experience with sailors singing them.
That's a great question, actually, because of the sea shanty phenomena is taken off. I can't say on the lakes necessarily. Of course, everyone remembers the Lightfoot song of the Fitzgerald loss. That's the most popular international song I can think of on the lake or regarding the lakes. So no, I don't know of too many songs other than, I'll say this, a lot of fellows on the ships who I come to know, and especially those that have the East Coast and places like Newfoundland, they would bring their guitars on the ship, and sometimes prior to the days of internet where you actually on board the vessels, you would meet as a crew and have tea and stuff and play darts. They would sing songs, from home, so they would sing along and play guitar. So to say that I remember a specific shanty or song, no, but I do remember them being quite colorful, and always musical, especially the fellows from the East Coast.
I think it's ingrained in their blood.
Probably so. Yeah, they're
Just part of it.
And they're also the best storytellers. Like if someone from Newfoundland were sitting beside me, I would just leave the room. They would be much better at telling stories than me, for sure. Without even trying. Yeah.
No, honestly, Jim, it's been a wonderful evening. We've had a lot of great feedback. Everybody's really loved your presentation. As you can tell from all the questions, a lot of curious people out there. And I will make sure that I send these comments to you so you have a copy of them.
That'd be great.
Here comes Dawn back again. Apologies about that.
No.
So a last call out for any other questions. I'm going to just double check the email here to make sure I haven't missed anyone. No. All right. If anyone does have any questions and I've missed them, apologies for that, but please feel free to email them to marmus, MARMUS at marmuseum.ca, and I will make sure to forward them on to Jim. Any messages that you would like to share. And of course, there's the website that has been provided where you can purchase the book online or the poster. And of course, there's the contact information on there as well. I'm just going back to too many notes, too many screens. So again, thank you so much, Jim. It was honestly a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Salma, for joining in and sharing the photographs for us today. This was a wonderful insight a bit more into the queens of the lakes and getting a better understanding of the work that you're doing and going to be doing in the future. I really look forward actually to reading the freshwater stories. Freshwater sailor stories. That will be a really good one to bring up.
Well, if you don't mind me closing with just two things.
Certainly.
Congratulations also to your students and interns, because when I looked at your website, I was encouraged to see that so many young people are doing such nice work for you. So congratulations to the interns and students. And also they will have come across, or they will now come across after I mention his name, and so will other people watching. Skip Gilham was a longtime friend. He was a great person, and he passed away not too long ago. And he was a historian, a Canadian marine historian who was admired on both sides of the border. He took pictures, he told stories. He was the truth keeper of the story of Lakers for sure in Canada. So Skip Gilham, if you want to Google his name and show him a bit of love, because his work was it's probably in your archives. You'll probably see his name come up now and again, well, a lot actually, because he was very prolific as a writer. I think at one time he was probably the most popular writer in Canada. He just put out these books nonstop about lakes vessels and stories of people on the lake. So the book is dedicated to Skip. So.
Thank you. I was going to say, I'm sure my colleague Doug has some reference to that, and perhaps quite possibly have copies in the museum's library. So just because we're talking kind of coming full circle now, the comment about where the museum is located. The Marine Museum of the Great Lakes at Kingston is located in Kingston. Currently, we are at Portsmouth Olympic Harbor, where we have a small storefront gallery. We moved there in 2016 following our downsize after the property was sold. All that to say that the great news is we are planning to move back to our historic location at 55 Ontario Street, planning for this spring, summer 2021. We're very, very excited. Renovations are underway, and I can honestly say it's having fond memories of going there as a child. It's great to be part of this project, and I welcome everyone to keep an eye on our website, on our social media pages, to get an idea of when that opening date is, when you are going to be able to book tours of the historic site for the coming summer. And of course, as we move forward, we'll start to grow in that respect. Right, last couple of things I just wanted to say. The Marine Museum is holding a public information session on the 23rd of February to discuss its plans for potential enclosure for a potential new museum ship. Everyone's heard the rumors of the SS Keewatin. I'm not going to dive into it, but it is a potential ship that the museum may acquire, and we are looking to potentially enclose it in a structure so that to protect it for the future and make it accessible all year long. So we invite members of the public to register for this event. It's free. It will be the same format as this one. The presentation will be made, and we look forward to receiving your feedback. Please take a look on our website for that information. Last thing I would like to say is, of course, Nautical Nights is far from over. We have a number of speakers lined up for the rest of the series. The next one is on the 24th of February with John Brebner, who's going to be talking about a history of the sandbanks. So anyone who's local to Lake Ontario or even farther afield will surely have memories of the sandbanks. And we're very much looking forward to inviting John in via YouTube in 2 weeks' time and listening to his stories about the local history of the sandbanks. So again, thank you very, very much, Jim, Salma, for your wonderful presentation. Thank you everyone this evening for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. And I invite you to join us again in 2 weeks. And if not, take care, stay well, be safe. And anyone who's still in lockdown, it's not long now. And be well, everybody. Thank you.
Peace.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. Bye.
Thank you, Michelle.
All right, that's